Yep.
Okay. Awesome. I didn't know if we were going to do introductions or if Angela was going to do that. So I guess, hi, everyone. Roxanne and Chelsea here from Solutions Pet Products. We are going to go into probably more detail than many of you would like to, or maybe not, into fermentation today. So this is our first round at this on the Retail Pet Live, so bear with us. Angela, God bless her heart, talked us through getting on today, and we're very excited to be here. So kind of let everybody log on here, and we got the first slide up here. Fermentation, of course, is the topic of today. So what you're looking at here is just kind of my outline, or our outline, of what we're going to talk about with fermentation. So you've got plenty of pieces to it that I want to make sure that we cover. So Chelsea and I are going to try to help each other here remember everything to cover. And if I need to, I may have to come back to this slide, but I think we've got it pretty much under control.
I'm sure we'll still miss some things because it's such a vast topic.
It is. So, Chelsea and I are just going to kind of just interject as needed as we go through the slides. So you'll hear me a little bit and Chelsea as well. And so let's get started. So fermentation, what is it? Why do we do it? A lot of people understand it through products. So of course, your typical products in the store that you guys eat and use regularly would be your yogurts, your cheeses, your kefir, your sauerkraut, your kimchi. And then there's all different degrees of and types of culturing and fermentation. And it's been going on for centuries and centuries. And this is nothing new. We have sort of modernized it, of course, with our modern day science practices and our food system. And maybe not for the better in some cases. I think that the traditional fermentation methods are still tried and true, and probably some of the best methods, which is why Chelsea and I like to have our farmers defer to the traditional methods, and we'll kind of let you know or give you a sneak peek into how that is done. But basically, just giving a little background history on me and why this intervention method sort of popped up in the raw food category. So as many of you know, my sister Jacqueline, unfortunately, is not with us today, but she was my mentor in pet food, and she started a raw pet food company and asked me to help her as a food scientist. And so when we put our heads together, one of the things that Jacqueline was a real purist, and she left another company that she was working for at the time because they decided to high pressure process or high pressure pasteurize their food, and that was not acceptable to Jacqueline at the time. And so she said, I don't want to go down that route. I want to do something different, and but we have to produce a safe food. So she pulled me into the group, and we put our heads together, and we came up with the best way that we felt to introduce a raw product into the market that was safe and truly raw was through fermentation. And I happen to have a background in that. I'm a dairy scientist, and I did my graduate work on proteolytic adjunct cultures in low-fat mozzarella cheese. So I have some background on using lactic acid bacteria for its functionality in food. And so when we put our heads together, we were like, wow, this could be a really good fit for a raw diet, and keeping it safe, having a good intervention method, and also making this food more bioavailable for these pets. And Chelsea was one of the first ones to jump on board. She heard about us. Jacqueline introduced herself, and Chelsea got it from the very beginning and understood the benefits from it. So I don't know if you want to talk about how you got introduced into fermented food from Jacqueline Chelsea, but I'll let you interject.
So I started my retail store, Heroes Pets, in 2007, and Jacqueline introduced herself in 2009. So we, hadn't been in business very long, but we had been doing raw foods. And I personally had been on kind of a long health journey of my own and had tipped my toe into a lot of different dietary options. So I had some understanding about fermentation and metabolism and, of course, raw pet foods and things like that. So, yeah, I guess, I mean, the first like 10 minutes of talking to Jacqueline, I was like, what? But then after that, I was like, oh, okay, I see the benefit. So, having something that is formulated to be a complete diet without using synthetics and using fermentation to contribute probiotics into the diet and not having a shelf stable addition. Um, having something that's higher calories so that you can feed less of it, and just all of the different factors that go into making a really unique product that is, in my opinion, more supportive to the system with less effort was really valuable. So, in a lot of cases, what I see is that people are like, yeah, I'm doing this healthy, holistic diet and these 58 different supplements. And that's so expensive. It's such a nightmare to use it. It's so difficult for the body to be able to metabolize all of those different things that you can end up doing more damage than benefit for the money that you're spending, especially. And so having something that really like consolidated and simplified everything is what seemed really valuable to me.
Yeah, exactly. So it just seemed like out of all the possibilities out there in the food industry at the time, um, that that was the most commensal with doing a raw diet and having a intervention method that was not a kill step, but was something that was going to protect the food and protect the shelf life and make it easy to use and kind of um, you know where you could temperature abuse it to some degree, and we're gonna talk about that moving forward. So like I said, you're going to hear about competitive inhibition of the probiotic diversity that fermentation offers, the additional nutrients. So a lot of people, so your bacteria, they're little factories. They're their own metabolic engines, right? So they are taking in nutrients as well, and converting those nutrients for us. So the easiest example in this situation is lactose, the sugar that's in milk. They take that in, they ferment it, and they spit back out lactic acid. That's an organic acid that's very valuable to the body and can help in buffering pH, both higher and lower, because it's a weak acid, so it will contribute that hydrogen proton, and that's what can change the pH of the thing. So it is going to definitely, make it typically more acidic as more lactic acid is built up, but it also buffers the body in general. B vitamins, they will actually concentrate the B vitamins themselves and make them more available for the body. So they're like incredible little engines that change and preform or take a preformed form of the vitamin and make it into a usable form of the vitamin that can change the isomer of it. Enzymes, critical. Can't stress enough how critical enzymes are, and part of the digestive process. And we often gloss over them. We forget about them. We forget how important they are and how fragile they are. So enzymes are very fragile peptides and basically small proteins and cofactors that are critical in the whole process of metabolism, indigestion, making sure they shuttle things to and from in the body to different places in the organs. And so having them available in the food and active, okay, that's critical when I say active, meaning that they can perform, they haven't been denatured, is a critical part of this process. And fermentation, so you already have those live enzymes and digestive enzymes available in raw food, and now you add these beneficial bugs, you know, this bacteria that actually is going to help convert some of those nutrients in that food, adding more of their own enzymes that they produce and that they're utilizing and helping to give the body to aid in that digestion. And that's where, in my opinion, fermentation and those live foods and having all that living bacteria actively metabolism, actively working in that food matrix before your dog consumes it is critical. And so I'm not getting down on pills and powders. I use some probiotic pills myself for specific strains and things, but there's nothing that's going to mimic that the actual live, living, actively fermenting food. A pill and powder is just not going to get there. So, you know, we need both. You know, if you're looking for a specific strain, I get it. And some of those pills and powders can deliver that. But the active live food itself with living bacteria in it is so critical for us and our pets to ingest on a daily basis. Vitamin K2, a lot of people don't know about that one. There's two forms of it. There's K1 and K2, and there's also many isomers of K2, MK4, MK7. Chelsea, you have the Encyclopedia Brain, which is the one that fermentation is the only form that fermentation will make. Is it the 4?
Actually, I don't know that. I know that MK7 is the important one for calcium.
Yes, of course. So, but there is a form of K that is literally only produced by actively fermenting bacteria that our bodies require that it thrives on. So we want to make sure that we're getting that active bacteria. And that leads me into pre-digestion. So like I said, I worked with proteolytic adjunct cultures in mozzarella cheese, and what we were trying to achieve was a faster aging process. And it all came down to money. That's what was funded by my research in grad school, was funded by the cheese pizza industry. So Leprino Foods and the mozzarella, the huge conglomerates that make all the mozzarella cheese for pizza. Oh, somebody did say, oh, you did.
That's me.
That's you, Chelsea. Cool. So that's the one. And anyway, so mozzarella needs to age 60 days. That's the minimum that they can age the cheese to get it to function to be like you want it on pizza. So the oiling off and the stretchiness and breaking down those proteins, right? That breaking down proteins, that takes it's an aging process. And the enzymes produced by those bacteria do that. That's what happens. And so my research was can we throw more proteolytic, meaning breaking down proteins, proteolytic cultures in there so it happens faster, and we can save $1 billion for the mozzarella cheese industry because we can age it in 30 days instead of 60. So this is what I'm trying to use as an example of breaking down protein. So that's a natural way to hydrolyze protein. So many of you might have dogs where a veterinarian will recommend a hydrolyzed protein diet. Chemical hydrolyzation is different than natural fermentation. And they will even use some natural fermentation methods in a hydrolyzed diet sometimes, but a lot of it is chemically stimulated and not a typical, you can't fool Mother Nature on that one. And so there's oftentimes recombinant or genetically modified bacteria or yeast that they'll use to produce those enzymes. A lot of the enzymes and things that are produced for the food industry for both nutraceuticals and just for food additives are produced by what they call recombinant E. coli or recombinant yeast. And they literally take a snippet of the genetics of the protein that they, or the enzyme that they want this bacteria to produce. Like I said, these bacteria become man-made factories, right, for a specific nutrient, but they have to genetically modify the DNA of that bacteria or that yeast to just basically replicate that enzyme or replicate that byproduct that they want. We're not talking about doing that here. We're talking about natural, unrestricted fermentation that will do that naturally, but we're not forcing it. Was there anything else you want to add, Chelsea, before I go to the next slide?
Nope, you're doing great so far.
All right, so let me see if I can advance that. Okay, there we go. So 100 trillion friends you didn't know you had. And I love this picture. Chelsea took this picture at John King's farm. You want to talk about snapping that picture, Chelsea?
Yeah, so there was a litter of border collie puppies there, and they have these tiny little deer there. And so John had gotten a deer and had cut the hide, and he put it just in the front yard, and he would let the puppies out to go and just sit and chew on this hide. So all of them would be running around, eating a little grass, chewing the hide, eating grass, chewing the hide, chewing on each other. So it was just so cool to see these little 9-10 week old puppies that are sitting there chewing on this just natural hide. There's so much extra fat in the skin. They're getting all the dirt, which has a whole bunch of different minerals in it that can be really supportive for digestive health as well. They're, just getting such diversity and such a natural diet with this. And they really, really loved it. So this is just one of the puppies.
So just a good example of, again, we preach that, microorganism diversity. I say microorganisms because, it's more than just lactic acid bacteria. It's yeast, it's fungus, even some what they consider parasites, opportunistic pathogens. That makes up a diverse microbiome. And yeah, I did use the word pathogen because we're going to talk about that too, that they may be commensal and actually provide some benefits existing at a certain level, existing to some degree in a balanced microbiome. They can play a role. So I want to get into that a little bit later. But yeah, this is an example of a puppy, on this is one of our Amish farmers that actually ferments the vegetables for us, having that spectrum of diversity, and that's critical, and we need it as well. So literally there is more bacterial DNA in your body than our own DNA in our cells. So it is part of our system. We don't operate independently from the bacteria in us, and neither do our animals. We all operate in tandem. Okay, so looking at fermented raw milk, that's one of my favorites. One of the easiest. Again, my background's in dairy, and so it's taking Mother Nature's perfect food, which you really can't improve on much except for one situation, and I think that's fermentation. I don't think that, I know that. I mean, that's the basics of that. That's the only thing that will really improve on one of Mother Nature's most perfect reproductive foods. And again, that's because we are in tandem with bacteria. These newly born mammals, whether it's human or a goat or a calf, have an immature GI. We have an immature system in general. When we're born. And so we require to be inoculated by mom and by environmental bacteria that would be harbored in our food supply. We want that. We want that good environmental bacteria from hopefully we're in a healthy environment, and mom is healthy, and siblings are healthy, and we're surrounded by, and that's what we become inoculated with on the inside and the out. And we want to nourish that all through our lives, and because that's what keeps us healthy, and that's the same for our pets. We want them to be able to nourish that bacteria that they're inoculated with at birth, hopefully from healthy mom, and continue to feed that bacteria that's keeping them healthy. So we're not only feeding ourselves, in the end, we're really feeding the bacteria that is commensurate with us in our body and our pets. And that's really important. And milk is a great way to do that because it is perfectly balanced. So a lot of people don't realize that, I get this a lot out in the field is, what about lactose intolerance? Aren't pets lactose intolerant? Aren't we lactose intolerant? No, so pasteurization, we talked about those enzymes, right? Those critical key enzymes. Well, heating milk over 135 degrees will inactivate your lactase enzyme that breaks down lactose. It will inactivate alkaline phosphatase enzyme, which is a key carrier for calcium across the intestinal wall, or the lumen, to get it to the right place in the body. So when I talk about milk and explain it and its benefits and why it's so healthy, it's two ends of the spectrum. For raw milk here as a healthy, not actually hypoallergenic food. It's a natural antihistamine. It should not trigger allergies. It should not do any of that in its raw state. For 99% of the population, it's very unusual for them to have a mammal to have a milk allergy because of that. We've bastardized our dairy system so bad over the last 100 and 150 years that pasteurized milk, commercial milk over on this end of the spectrum, is now an allergenic food. It's an inflammatory food. And when you go into a doctor's and you're complaining about this, what is many of these doctors, and even holistic ones that may not quite understand that raw milk's available, say, get off dairy. That's one of the things that they often will say. And what happens when people get off dairy? They start to feel better because they're drinking commercial dairy that's pasteurized, it's homogenized. So homogenization is the spinning of it to get the fat separated. So every single bottle of milk, unless it's from the farm and you can see the milk cream level on top, every other commercial milk that you're buying in the store automatically goes into a separator pasteurization machine. So when you talk about animals and their natural macronutrients of their milk, their makeup of their milk, right? We talk about, the Holstein cow, and it's a little bit lower in fat. And then there's the Guernsey and your Jersey cows that might have a 6 or 7% fat level. There's your goats. Well, in the commercial dairy market, which is mostly Holstein cow, every bit of milk is separate. So they don't take, a lot of people think, well, 1% milk and 2% milk, like they're taking some of the fat out. No, the cream and the milk get separated immediately. They spin off the fat, and the cream goes over here and the milk goes here, and they get pasteurized, and then they get put back together at a certain percentage of fat. And that process is so hard on the proteins and the fat, the sheer force that they have to do to force it through the pasteurizers, to force it through the homogenization, is so destructive to that natural milk that it's no longer a healing food, unfortunately. And so that's where we're at in our dairy industry. So raw milk that literally comes out of the animal, maybe goes through some tubing to get to a bulk tank, is chilled immediately and then filled into cartons. That's it. That's the most processing it gets. It doesn't go through a pressure pasteurizer. The cream is never being separated out. it is its whole food as it sits. It's not being heated, so enzymes are not inactivated. Um, your bacteria that are naturally in there are going to stay in there, and then you can certainly add more to that. So that's what I'm talking about here when we talk about the perfect food. 200 plus probiotics. That's what the literature so far on raw milk has stated. There, I think there's newly published literature that even has identified more. But in the past 50 years, that's about what they've isolated so far, 200 plus different species of beneficial bacteria in raw milk. That's uninoculated raw milk. That's before we add our probiotics. That's just basic raw milk. 100 times more gut population. There is a study on this, and this is very interesting because this is where I hear a lot of the arguments out in the field. Well, your gut, your hydrochloric acid in your gut pretty much destroys the bacteria before it even gets there, and nothing really can colonize, whether it's in a pill or a powder in the food. Yes, there is truth to that. Our hydrochloric acid in our stomach, past the enzymes and amylases and things in our mouth, is our first line of defense in kind of controlling how much gets through and pathogenic bacteria. And it is very important. And yes, there is a lot of destruction that happens with the hydrochloric acid. But again, Mother Nature in her wisdom understands this. And so that's what I'm talking about with cofactors and these little hidden gems that help the bacteria, the living bacteria, actually get through the acid of the stomach and colonize the GI system and set up shop in there. And they did a study on that exact subject using milk. And what they discovered was that the casein in milk, which is one of the proteins, there's whey proteins and casein proteins in milk, and then there's subsets of those different proteins. But there was a particular, I think it was the alpha S1 casein that kind of encompassed almost the bacteria and made like a little, think of like a knight in armor, kind of where the body goes into, they put the armor on before they go joust or whatever. Well, that's kind of what the casein protein does to these bacteria, and it protects them through the hydrochloric acid, and so they do get through, and they are able to colonize the gut. And they found that particularly raw milk was able to do this much better than pills and powders could, because they don't have the cofactors there. I already talked about
typical that a shelf stable powder, like I think the most strains that I've seen of a probiotic in a shelf stable powder is like 14, with a lot of them being a lot better quality, and they have 8. So you are getting an isolated product with those kinds of things. One other thing I just want to interject really quick is I often hear people that are like, after infancy, mammals really don't drink milk. And if you spend time on a farm, then you know that that's not true. And if you look at historical data, that's also not really true for people either, especially during times where there's famine. Milk is one of the primary staples for being able to survive because it's nature's perfect food, and it's not something where you have to, grow it. The animals tend to do a pretty good job of producing it. So there's that, but also like the farmer where I took the picture of the puppy chewing on the deer skin. So that same farmer has this cow, Autumn, and he complains about her drinking her own milk sometimes. Like she's back there, horns and all, and she's like twisting to drink her own milk. So not only will mammals actually drink milk as an adult, sometimes they'll drink another adult's milk. They'll drink their own milk in some cases. So I think that it is a misconception to believe that milk is only for infants.
I fully agree, 100%. So caprylic acid, a lot of folks, especially in goat milk in particular, the medium chain fatty acids are quite high in goat milk. Medium chain fatty acids are good for a lot of things. And they're anti-inflammatory, they're antimicrobial. They can fight yeast. they offer a lot of benefits. And so if you're not messing with the fat in the milk and you're not destroying those fat micelles through high pressure and through pasteurization and shear force on those and homogenization, then that dairy fat is extremely beneficial. One of the best fats that you can consume. Glutathione, very high in milk. So glutathione, we all know that is one of the greatest antioxidants. It's an incredibly high performer antioxidant. So we want that in our daily diet.
Particularly beneficial for the thyroid. Glutathione and selenium are imperative to basically turn hydrogen peroxide that your thyroid produces into water so that your thyroid continues to be healthy. So if you don't have enough glutathione, it can acutely damage very important things like the thyroid, but also your oxidative stress in the body will maintain a higher level in general without having enough of it.
Absolutely. Again, I can't stress enough how easy this should be for digestion, and that's why I'm so saddened when I hear people say I can't digest dairy. It wreaks havoc on my stomach. And yes, most commercial dairy is, again, they're using in the cheese industry, they use a recombinant rennet substitute called chymosin. So rennet is the natural calf enzyme that will clot milk and create those curds, and that's one of the things that cheesemakers have used since the beginning of our food system and using food. And they went away from that, and I understand because of the veal industry and calves, and there is some negative, definitely some negative attributes to the commercialization of that. But your alternative then is so we've in the past have used both the rennet from the calves and then microbial or actually fungal rennet, which is not genetically modified. It's not a recombinant DNA, so you can get something similar. But again, you can't trick Mother Nature, and rennet always seems to do the best. So when pretty much 99% of the cheese, and again, unless it's from a small craft manufacturer who's doing raw cheese, what you're buying in the commercial stores uses a clotting enzyme that is genetically modified. It's recombinant chymosin. And so, there's all these nuances to dairy that we're being exposed to that we don't realize is not part of natural dairy. Like, it's not the typical parts, and including the pasteurization. And so these are the things that are making it a non-digestible food or a hard to digest food. And raw milk, being the reproductive food that it is not that food. It's not the same. I understand where people have their hesitation with dairy and they have a bad experience with it, or they've had, a history of not a good history with it. And because our history in this country in the dairy industry is highly sordid, it's not good. And we've ruined it for the last 100 years. And we have farmers now that are doing it correctly, and they do understand it, and they can do raw milk hygienically, and they can do it safely, and they are, and we're part of that group of people. And we're so blessed to have these farmers to be able to tap into this nutrient dense food, because it really is a true blessing to have these partnerships. And we always are boasting about our farms because they deserve it. They do a great job.
I'm going to jump in on the natural antihistamine thing and also answer the fatty 15 question that I see. So the fatty 15 actually is considered an essential fatty acid. It's really good for like improving liver health, improving cholesterol levels. It's supportive for cellular metabolism, all kinds of different things, and it is known to be high in full fat dairy, so basically unprocessed raw dairy like ours. So you don't have to buy it as a supplement in an isolate that's probably not going to be as beneficial because it doesn't have those cofactors and co-nutrients. So yes, I would say that it does tie in with that. Also, on the antihistamine benefit, so there's a lot that I could say about how raw milk is a natural antihistamine, but the primary things are that there are a few nutrients that are necessary for producing the enzymes that help to metabolize histamine. So those enzymes are called DAO, diamine oxidase, and HNMT, histamine and methyltransferase. So for you to be able to produce those, you need enough calcium. Obviously, milk is high in that. Copper, which in a natural form you don't need that much of. Only in an isolate form do you need as much as AFCO says. So there is some copper in raw milk in an appropriate form. And then methylated vitamin B6, which B vitamins are naturally high in raw milk, but as Roxanne already stated, it's even higher in a fermented product. So you're actually getting double benefit. So you get the ability to produce those enzymes more effectively. In addition, you get anti-inflammatory benefit, like neurocognitive benefits. There's all kinds of things that kind of tie in there, but it's one of the best antihistamines out there on the condition that it's not processed in a way that eliminates the body's access to those nutrients, such as via pasteurization.
Well said, Chelsea. Absolutely. All right, now we're going to get to some fun stuff that you guys are going to see. This is the intimate research that Chelsea and I behind the scenes are like, well, what do we want to do next? Let's see. Let's get some good lab results here. And so most recently, we sent out all 4 milks to our local lab and for lactic acid bacteria growth, and it's as I expected. And that's what we wanted to reassure ourselves that those living, breathing, active, wild bacteria that we're using are indeed flourishing and fermenting and doing what they're supposed to in the milk. So this is a really cool chart. So you'll see the first one is our tummy butter tea kefir, and it's exactly what you would expect from a kefir. You're getting right out of the gate, you're getting the mature culture system in that stationary phase. So in bacterial growth, you'll have like, it's almost like a bell curve, okay? You'll have your lag phase, and then they call your log phase is your logarithmic phase, and that's where they're basically doubling every 20 minutes to an hour. They'll double their population because they're in high growth phase at that point. And then they'll kind of peak and hit a stationary phase. And then, eventually they will die off as the food and nutrients go away and they can't continue to ferment. So that's really cool because we can kind of put them in those stages in this chart. So what we did here is I had the lab thaw the product like you would at home. And I told them just take the frozen pint and leave it out on the counter at room temperature. And when it gets basically to room temperature, let's do a lactic acid bacteria quantification. Then leave it for another 12 hours at that room temperature. Leave some out and let's do another lactic acid bacterial culture. And then let's leave it out for 24 hours at room temperature and see the bacterial growth in that and watch that pattern and see how it's doing. And this is pretty much what I expected and hoped for, and even really better than what I've hoped for. So what we're seeing so the kefir is the oddball out in the 4 milks because, like I said, all of them are cultured, but the tummy butter tea kefir is made into a true kefir, meaning before Irvin puts it in those cartons and sends it to the blast freezer, David Esch, our cheesemaker, warms that milk only to about 80 degrees, 85 degrees, like a warm room temperature. puts in the cultures, our kefir grains, okay, which are from Poland, by the way, that we ordered in, and Steve grows up for us. So he'll take a gallon jug, and Steve keeps feeding these kefir grains and just keeps them active at his place. And then when David's ready to make a batch, he'll give him the kefir grains, and he'll put that in. And we do have a commercial culture we add to that as well. And then we allow that to ferment at that 80 degrees, about 15 to 18 hours. And that's where you'll see the high load of bacteria. Then they're active, they're going. And then Irvin bottles it, it gets frozen, everything's in suspended animation until you take it home and thaw it. And what I was really pleased to see is the quick recovery from the thaw. Like, that's amazing right out of the gate, thawed like that, to be up at the 100 million, approaching a billion CFUs right on your countertop at initial thaw. So it's really
and
cool.
That's per gram.
That is per mil or gram. Yep. So you drink an ounce of that, an ounce is 30 mils basically. So 30 times what you're seeing here. So you're in the billions. You're in the billions to take an ounce of this product. And they're active and they're live and they're producing enzymes. And then you let it sit for another 12 hours and they grow a little more and you get a little bit more activity. So you're getting that high active lactic acid metabolism there. They're churning away. And then 24 hours, they kind of stabilize and they hang out. And, if we kept going, we could see, eventually the decline. But in the refrigerator, when their metabolism, so this is all at room temperature. So now you've let that milk sit out on your counter 12, 24 hours, and now you put it back in the fridge. And now their metabolism, you're taking it down from that 75 degrees or so down to maybe 40, 42 degrees. And now they're just going to slowly metabolize. So they're not going to die, but the metabolism is going to slow down and it's going to slow everything. And they're just going to stay in that stationary phase and continue to hang out. Now, the other three milks, we do differently. We culture them. So the culture is put in cold, never warmed before you. So so as soon as Irvin milks those goats, it goes into the pipe and it immediately goes to the chilled tank, and it chills it within minutes down to about 36 to right above, not much above freezing. It's between 36 and 38, at most 40 degrees. That milk gets chilled, and then Irvin dumps in the whey cultures, and then the herbs or whatever we're inoculating with on that stays cold, never warms up, goes into the carton, gets blast frozen, gets to your door, you take it out and you thaw it. And now you can see the next one over is the Better Butter tea. At first, when it first thaws, okay, we didn't have that high growth. We never gave it the chance to get that super high growth rate. But now let's sit it on the counter for 12 hours and start letting it warm up. And now it starts to grow very quickly. And by 24 hours, your probiotic level is almost as high as the kefir.
And of note, the Better Butter doesn't have any additional fermented ingredients in it. So the Tummy Butter, we are actively fermenting it. The Better Butter, it has the wild whey cultures in it, so it can ferment itself once you thaw it if you want to grow the beneficial bacteria that much. The goat nog is starting higher because we're fully fermenting the duck eggs. And so that one's starting out at a higher level of beneficial bacteria for that reason. And then with the Texas, the fermented raw goat milk, we're adding fermented turmeric and fermented ginger. So you're getting the wild whey cultures in all of those three. But then you also have some other variables that are boosting that baseline from the Better Butter, which is at the lowest to start. So like if you had a pet that is really, really sensitive, they have very severe dysbiosis, they've never had any decent food before or anything like that, then starting with something like the Better Butter, where you're just providing a little bit of competitive bacteria into their system at a time, so you're not overwhelming them. Like, you could take that out and you could choose to say, I'm going to start really low and I'm not going to let this sit on the counter, and I'm just going to kind of baby step them into getting a better gut. And then you could leave it out a little longer, or a little longer, a little longer, or you could switch over to, say, the fermented raw goat milk, and then you could switch to goat nog, and then you could switch to tummy butter, so that you get this really large load of balancing. So you can utilize these kinds of numbers as a way to cater to the condition of the pet.
Well said, Chelsea. Exactly. And that's why we feel that, all 4 of these can be rotated through a healthy pet that's got a good diversity of microorganisms, just to keep, and each one too is going to have its own microbial ecology. So like, when we talk about the tech sauce, we pre-ferment the turmeric and the ginger, and so they're going to come with their own microbial ecology from that wild ferment that's getting added into there. So there's going to be a little bit different profile bacteria that's in the tech sauce compared to the goat nog that has the ale and the ecology of that. So all very important, all really good to rotate through, and all have some specifics. So I know we're getting close on time here. We could talk about this all day, so I'm going to go a little bit faster through these slides. But I did want to show you, this one is a generic one from back in the day on refrigerated LAB growth. So even in the refrigerator, because a lot of this lactic acid bacteria is what they call mesophilic. It's just a fancy word to say it'll grow at those lower temperatures. So you've got your cyclophilic bacteria that'll grow actually in almost frozen temperatures. They can grow very low. There's very few of those bacteria in the food system. And then your mesophiles will grow at those, will actually grow slightly. They'll metabolize less slowly at your refrigerated temperatures. And then your thermophiles, or your heat-loving bacteria, will grow at the higher temperatures. But you will get growth as it sits in that refrigerator. And that's, again, why we say, take it home, thaw it on the counter, and it's good in your fridge for 3 weeks or so, maybe even longer. So that's what's great about our diets. It's perishable, but not perishable to the point where you've got to rush through it. Like, this is fresh food. Eventually, all fresh food does have some perishability, but you've got a lot of time to play with it, and it actually gets better with some time. So using it as a food safety mechanism, this is what I love about it. It's inoculation and nurturing of good bacteria. So again, bacteria and enzymes will pre-digest that food. Competitive bacteria inhibits pathogen growth. Okay, this is our safety mechanism, guys. This is why this works. So it discourages the spoilage microorganisms as well. Your micronutrients become more bioavailable because it's swimming in those enzymes. Not only the enzymes that were in that fresh food, but the digestive enzymes that those bacteria are producing and making. And then, so in my opinion, you got raw food, and then you got competitive bacteria rich raw food. And that one, so you got the good, better, best, I'd say right at the top, that bacteria that's in that raw food, that fermented raw bacteria, is going to be even more superior than a food that doesn't have the competing bacteria in it.
And really quick, I want to mention, we don't ferment the meats, which helps to keep the histamine levels low. So for people that are like, well, fermentation is going to make my allergy-prone pet worse because of histamine, that's not true. This is formulated in a way that specifically avoids that while still providing the benefits Roxanne's talking about.
Yeah, this is not a summer sausage. We are not warming the meat and allowing it to ferment, right? But here's a good graph as to, you can see that and how that eventually would happen. So this is Solutions chicken recipe. We did this lab results back in October of 2025, and you can see here again, I told the lab, thaw it in the refrigerator for 72 hours. This is what most people will go home and do. So they'll take it out of the freezer, they'll stick it in their fridge, and they thaw it in the fridge till they serve it to their dog. Well, you can see, again, this is per gram. So over 1.5 million cultures, CFUs per gram of beneficial bacteria in there. It's just sitting in your fridge and waiting to inoculate your dog's stomach with, right? Or your dog's GI system. And then the next one, sorry, my R's are bad here. The next one, it's thawed at 12 hours at room temperature. And this is my routine. So I take my dog's food out at about 7:30 in the morning, out of the chest freezer. I strip off the paper casing. I throw it in a casserole dish, and I stick a piece of wax paper on top of it. And it sits there from 7 a.m., 7:30 to about 5:30 when I feed them. So that's my case scenario there. So that, again, we're up to almost over 2 million. And again, this is per gram. So when you're talking about an ounce of food, you got to multiply that by 30. And then the third one there is thawed, refrigerated for 10 days. So that's where, again, I love our food because you can kind of temperature abuse it, and it's only going to get better because of the inoculation of that bacteria. And so that's 10 days in the refrigerator, you're up at 5 million. So you're seeing that beneficial growth, and we primed it that way. It's on purpose. Now let's leave it out for 2 days, mind you, 48 hours at room temperature. What happens if we really temperature abuse this food and we leave it out and we forgot that, my gosh, I left it out on the counter and I totally forgot about it, and I don't want to waste this food,
Most people forget it in the trunk of their car.
Yeah, exactly. Feed it out. You're looking at 700 million per gram. That's lactic acid bacteria, folks. That's beneficial. That's fermentation at its best. And so no spoilage microorganism or salmonella or pathogen is going to be able to compete with that. It's just not physically, the physics of that is just not possible. So that's why this works so well. That's why we're very confident in it. And that's why a lot of folks do like our food, because they have that opportunity to do that with. And lastly, I just want to say, this is not a kill step, okay? And I want to be very clear and transparent about that, because as a food scientist and somebody who's worked in food safety now, and back in the day, and I worked at Jack in the Box, full disclosure, not long after they had their E. coli incident. Raw food and kill step is an oxymoron, okay? You cannot have a truly raw food if you're going to do a kill step, because that kill step process is harsh enough to kill the pathogens and damage everything else. So you want a safe food. You definitely want something that we can be confident that is safe for our pets and for us to be around. And that's why fermentation works so great. So as I was saying, there may be, and when they do PCR tests, and there's a whole nother lecture I think Chelsea and I could get into on the polymerase chain reaction test that FDA uses and the sensitivity of it. You got to remember, on those tests, they're amplifying DNA or RNA, depending on what they're looking for in that food matrix. And when you do that, you have no way of telling if the cells are viable, how much they'll grow, if they're growing. You have to quantify, and you have to do that on a Petri dish. It's a longer process. FDA doesn't bother to do that. So I threw this slide up here because I'm a big fan of Natasha Campbell McBride. She wrote the GAPS diet, the gut and psychology syndrome. She's a PhD in neuroscience, a master's in nutrition. She knows her stuff, and in her books, and she was the first one to explain the gut-brain axis and understanding that the gut influences the brain, because she worked a lot with her autistic. She had an autistic son that she worked a lot with nutrition to get him into remission, and she successfully did. And she says, an 80-20 is not unheard of. So 80% of your beneficial probiotic microorganisms, you can have 20% of that being pathogens or opportunistic pathogens. That could still be a healthy microbiome. and both in the food supply and in your gut, in your pet's gut. So I want people to understand that let's stop the fear mongering about if there's a pathogen in there, it's dangerous, you're going to get sick, recall it. That is not good science. Yes, there is foodborne illness. Yes, people get sick every day from salmonella, E. coli. I'm not dismissing that these things exist and they're there, but what I'm saying is you don't need a kill step necessarily to control that. And it starts with sourcing. You have to have impeccably good sourcing, and then you can do an intervention step like this. If you're sourcing from confined animal feeding operations or feedlot cattle, you're not going to be able to have this type of intervention.
And if you do research, like if you type in NCBI salmonella, it'll actually come up with a number of different articles that show that there's research on salmonella strains being used for anti-cancer and other health benefits. And so isolating something into this is only bad or this is only good is really not beneficial. There are even beneficial bacteria that can be detrimental if you have them in excess relative to other bacteria that should be in the body. So diversity is really important. And one good way to think about the way that this slide is presented is that a kill step that sterilizes is like dropping an atomic bomb on a city to get rid of the bad guys, which are obviously not everybody, versus the fermentation that we're doing is like introducing an army of individuals to go and find the bad guys and keep them regulated. So it's like a sterilization method. The goal is let's just wipe everything, and we just don't see that as valuable to the body. So that's not what we're trying to get at, and that's why we feel that this is a better way to go.
100%. Well said. And that pretty much wraps it up to questions. We took the whole hour. See, I knew it wasn't going to be hard to do that.
Yeah, can you scroll that up? Is that the whole entire question? Is it beneficial for pet parents to give fermented foods like sauerkraut in place? Is all I can see. What I can say is, yes, I do think that there's benefit to adding fermented foods, but there's also a couple of caveats too. So if you have a pet that has certain mineral imbalances, kidney problems, adrenal problems, bone remodeling, things like that, then sometimes you might inadvertently be adding in some anti-nutrients. So it is valuable for you to understand what you're doing. Also, if you're fermenting with salt, then you, in some cases, want to be calculating that into your total. So yes, you can definitely add things. You just want to be a little bit knowledgeable about what you're doing. Don't do it in excess. And also don't use it as a way to like mitigate pathogens in another product. Like if you had a feedlot sourced product because it's more affordable and you added sauerkraut brine in, you can't assume that that's going to have the protective benefit because like Roxanne said, the bad bacteria might be too high for the good bacteria to outcompete it.
This one I think I can take. Will benefits be lost if you refreeze? Not necessarily, no. So again, the process of thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing, yes, it is damaging to the cells, and we want to minimize that as much as we can. But you can certainly take it home and thaw it. And if you're not using through all of it, one of the things that Chelsea and I often suggest is redistributing it into a silicone ice tray or whatever, and then putting wax paper over it and refreezing it. Again, those bacteria will survive, as you can see in the slide that I showed you. We're anywhere from a month to 6 months frozen storage by the time you guys get it to your shelf. So it recovers. It does. And what freezing will do is put everything in suspended animation. So that's why freezing isn't a kill step, and you can do raw foods and fresh foods from frozen because it isn't a kill step, but it just puts everything into a non-metabolic state where it just sits. And as soon as that warm up happens again and it frees up those nutrients and reestablishes that ecosystem in that food, then it'll kick in and they'll recover. So I hope that answered your question on that. Any others? Do you recommend bringing the milk? I'm like only seeing half the questions. You'll have to read them to
do you recommend bringing the milk to room temp on the stove? I would say generally not. Like, you could if you are careful and you're using a thermometer. You don't want to bring it really over 110 degrees, preferably even below 104. I just stick it in the sink and let it sweat overnight. And even if it's warm by the time I get it in the fridge in the morning, then that's fine. So if I want to thaw it more rapidly, normally I'll just take the whole entire container, frozen, sealed, and just put it in a mixing bowl full of cool water so that I'm maintaining as much of the beneficial bacteria as possible. So I wouldn't say hard no on the stove, but be careful.
Yeah, monitor the temperature so you don't end up inadvertently pasteurizing it and cooking it.
Yeah. What do you say to people who question the use of milk beyond weaning? Example, we as humans commonly drink cow's milk at all life stages versus in nature's animals. I kind of mentioned that earlier. I think animals drink milk a whole lot more often than we like to think. And anybody that lives on a farm will tell you that their animals are always drinking milk. Our farmers, so Autumn, the cow that I was talking about that drinks her own milk, they actually got that cow to give milk to the pigs because they didn't want to share the goat milk because they wanted to drink the goat milk themselves. So yeah, I think in nature and also all around the world and all throughout history, milk has been used as a staple for nutrition at all life stages.
And just a quirky example to that, I'll add, they were studying this type of bird. It was some kind of seabird. It wasn't a seagull, but it was similar to that. And these birds would swoop down and try to steal the milk from the lactating sea lions, the seals and the walruses. And they would come down and try to get, when they were nursing, these birds would come in and take samples and steal the milk from the nursing babies of these walruses and sea lions in some northern territory. If anybody's really interested, I can try to drag up the publication, or you can search it on Google, birds stealing milk from sea lions.
And Roxanne also has a story about a guy that, as a very young child, inadvertently ingested a chemical that destroyed his digestive system, and never in his life was he able to eat food. He just survived on raw milk until old age. And what did he die at, like 80 something, I think he said?
Yeah, this was back in the early 1900s. This was it's an anecdotal case. I don't know that it was, 100% fact checked, but it came through the years of, and it ended up in a book that this is what happened to this. He drank lye, which is what they use for making soap, and so the sodium hydroxide, and it ruined his digestive system. Couldn't digest solid food, so they realized he could digest milk, raw milk, and he lived off that till he was 80.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
All right.
All right, gang. Well, I think that Angela recorded this, so I believe this will be, I know, Russ, you were seeing if you missed the first half somewhere. Yes, this should be on our recorded site. Yes.
Yep, she says it's good to go.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I hope that we helped you learn some more about fermentation. You can always reach out at nurture at solutionspetproducts.com for further questions and comments and so forth. So check us out.